Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Mike. This is the Leadership Toolkit. As you know, it's your definitive leadership training and growth podcast. I'm really glad that you've taken the time to tune in and join me today. I have so many just phenomenal guests on from all different verticals of business, all different backgrounds in management and leadership, oftentimes entrepreneurs learning and leading themselves, and oftentimes someone like my guest today, who I'm excited to have on. I just met and we chatted for a few minutes. Mark J. Silverman. He started off as in tech. He did $90 million in sales for fast growing startups and bringing together executives and tech leaders. So that was really interesting and exciting to me. And now Mark helps CEOs, senior leadership, and fast rising achievers leverage their resources and teams for greater impact. He's also the host of the Rising Leader podcast. He's got a Rising Leader playbook. I think he's got a Rising Leader book and he's an author. He's got several other books. So I'm really excited to get into it and have a great conversation with Mark J. Silverman today. Mark, welcome to the show. Welcome to the Leadership Toolkit.
Thank you. It's so much fun to listen to an introduction like that. After, being a coach for 11 years, when I first was on podcasts, it was like, hey, this is Mark. He's a coach. And, you stay in the game long enough, you get a little resume going, right?
Sure. No, I'm really, really excited to have you on. I know you've spent several years coaching and growing people, and especially high-level executives. We were talking a little bit before the show. I love the name of the podcast, and you've got the book right there behind you, the Rising Leader Handbook, talking to people that are coming into leadership. And we're talking a little bit maybe about reminding those existing leaders of the things that they may have forgotten. So if you would take a few minutes, Mark, and share, what's your background, what is your come up in business and leadership, and just share that with the audience here.
Sure. So my background is a little different than most people's. I started life as an alcoholic and a drug addict, and my story kind of starts when I was 27, homeless, living in my truck. Came to Washington D.C. to borrow some money from my brother, and that's where he helped me get sober and get myself together. So I got sober and started going to college classes. I got a job at the Four Seasons waiting tables, worked my way through college. I wound up getting married, having kids. And then I got my first sales job, which was really interesting because I am an introvert and I'm shy. I don't like to bother people. But I got a job as a sales guy. And once I cracked the code on how to create relationships, one-on-one relationships, and build trust, my career took off. So I went from homeless and waiter to millionaire, living in $1 million house and driving a sports car pretty quickly. The way I became a coach was after about a decade and a half of real success and being the committee chair for the Boy Scouts and like third grade basketball coach and all that stuff. The wheels started coming off. There was some internal work that had to be done. And this, I think, happens to most people in midlife. When they get to a certain point, those cracks in the armor start to come. I was really, really successful because I wanted to prove to people that I wasn't that homeless guy. I didn't want people to see that flawed inside. So the outside looked really good. So by not doing that, my marriage fell apart and my health fell apart. My career, I couldn't sell anything. My career fell apart. And I was suicidal and depressed. And that's when I made the decision to do something to change, to do the work. And I started training for a marathon. Even though I couldn't run, I decided I was going to run a marathon. And I had some goals in life. And then I started, just reading every self-help book, every spiritual book, everything I could get my hands on how do you become a functioning and thriving human being. And after several years, all of a sudden, I couldn't not share what I learned with other people. I was watching all the people around me, all the people in the 1% that I lived around, and I watched behind the curtains, the cracks in the armor, the failing marriages, the addiction, all the things that were happening in secret. And I wasn't okay with the price we were all willing to pay to be in the 1%. So I started my coaching wanting to help people thrive while being successful. It was a very noble effort. But as I coached over the years, what naturally your gifts and your talents start to attract the kinds of clients you're going to be working with. And that's when I started working with people who are rising really quickly in organizations. Usually they're super, super talented. You talked about it at the beginning, super talented, but maybe don't have those leadership skills, and they can get all the way to the C-suite with those,
Hmm.
with that charisma, with that drive, with all of those things. And then they're either a bull in a china closet on the leadership team and drive the CEO crazy, or they don't speak up enough, but and the CEO wants them to participate more. So that's where my niche is. I'm good with the problem children, the people who are uncoachable. Give me the people who are uncoachable every day of the week. So that's what I do is I coach leaders on senior leadership teams who need to grow up.
I love it when you're saying that. It makes me think of it. There's so much analogy in sports and leadership and business. It makes me think like you're coaching the Ocho Cincos of leadership, right? If you're familiar with him from
100%.
where it's like, I'm a little bit of a showboat. I got this natural raw talent, but watch this. Shut up and let me do my thing. And you're like, no, 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 you got to come back down here. So I find a lot of that really interesting. I wrote down a few questions, and I hope we're able to get to all of them today. One of the things, and people may not realize this because I was shocked, and not to get into age, but what you said, okay, when I was 27, I had all this stuff happen. And then you said you rose very quickly, got into sales, got into the relationships. What was that? What is really quickly? What's the time frame? How quickly do you think somebody can turn something like that around?
Well, I'd say the day I stopped drinking and doing drugs,
Okay.
everything turned around. Right, the day I started
Okay.
going to AA and NA meetings and had a group of friends who were all rowing in the same direction, everything turned around. My brother forced me, if I was going to live with him, he said I had to go to the gym and I had to take college classes. So it took me until
Okay.
I was in my 40s to actually get a college degree. I was married and had kids by the time I got my college degree. But for me, and in the 90s, back then,
Sure.
it was really important for my self-esteem to have that college degree. It didn't matter what kind of car I drove. It didn't matter what money I made. I still felt like a loser around everybody else. It only took, I would say it took about 8 years to go from homeless to millionaire.
That's wild, man. Because that really is not that long of a time. I mean, when in the grand scheme of things. So I was just curious what that time frame was. So you said once you made it into that C-suite and the millionaire, and you were selling and you were kicking butt and taking names. You said some wheels started to fall off, and you started listening to things, reading things, having different influences in your life. What was that time frame?
So let me take you back though
Yeah.
to just real quickly. So when I got into tech and into sales,
Hmm.
I was totally over my skis. I did not have the experience to do that. I didn't have the self-esteem to do that. I put my hand up and forced myself into a job that terrified me. So I went to work terrified every single day. If my engineer didn't show up and I had to give a presentation to a group of people, the sweat would pour down my face. And so like that's why I had to learn and I learned later in life that introverts make the best salespeople because we create relationships. So like people who are my clients today were
Hmm.
customers way back then. That's the kind of relationships I built. So fast forward, remember, I didn't have the self-worth. I didn't have the self-esteem. So when I got the house, when I got the family, when I got all those things, uh, I used those to band-aid things. So when in mid and again I know this in midlife that the drives and motivations, Dr. K calls it the toxic drive that makes you uber successful. At some point you run out of that fuel. That fuel is cotton candy. It's not sustainable. And if you don't replace it with something that's substantive and real, that's when midlife crises come out. And that's where financial issues, health issues or relationship issues all show up. And so I was a textbook case for not listening to those voices that says things are not going well inside. And that's when everything fell apart. So I found myself in an apartment, around the corner from my wife and kids in this, little apartment going, what the hell happened?
So let me ask you, because then I think it's easy for people. There's two things. It's hard for people to see that from where you sit now, because like you tune in and like you can articulate that in a matter of 5 minutes, and we look and go, oh man, he's got the Rising Leader Handbook, Mark's super successful, and so forth. But at the time, it's much more penetrating, I guess, and we all go through that as humans, right? Where it's just like, oh my gosh, It's that I've heard someone call it the threshold of deservingness. Do you recall? You're familiar with
I've
what I'm
never
talking about?
heard that before. Yes, I get it.
Yeah, I've heard somebody. Gosh, I wish I could remember the author. I can visualize the guy. It'll come to me halfway through the show, but he said one of the things that it keeps us from breaking through is we have this threshold of deservingness. A lot of people inadvertently will say, well, that's what that's how much my parents made, and so that's our threshold for what we believe. Do you remember? So you're saying, hey, I was terrified going to work every day. You were living in an apartment around the corner, and you said to me a few minutes ago, hey, I started doing all these self-helps and you know uh, I think you said spiritual guidance and so forth. Do you remember what were, two or three things specifically? And I'm asking for the sake, because I think a lot of people get promoted past their ceiling, right? Especially when we
Sure.
get into leadership and management, they get pulled into this. And again, it's easy to look at someone like Mark and go, oh man, he's kicking ass and taking names. But what was that thing when you were saying, hey, this is tough. I'm terrified to go to work. This is broken. I don't feel right about this. Do you remember two or three maybe specific activities? Was it the gym? Was it the brother saying, hey, you got to go to school? Or was that
Oh,
before that?
you mean the turnaround?
Yeah, the turnaround. What are two or
I
three
think the turnaround that's
pinpoints?
relevant is the one that where I was stone cold sober and I was already, already successful and it all fell apart. And you're right, it was that threshold. For me, the only thing I knew inside was comfortable with was chaos. The only thing my psyche was used to was being the problem, because I was the
Mm,
problem for so long. So being the solution, being clean and competent wasn't a comfortable place for me. So my reset was down, and the specific moment was I was in my apartment, and I had
mhm.
just bought my ex-wife a new Toyota Highlander. I wanted her to drive a nice new car. I bought her a baby grand piano because I just felt so guilty for all this. So I bought her, and wanted her to learn, to play piano again because she played piano. So my
Okay.
kids lived in the house, right? And I had an old desk that I took out of someone's garbage, and I had our old silverware and dishes that were in the basement, and I was sitting there, and I read a book called Relax into Wealth by Alan Cohen. Very Course in Miracles, very very uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, doesn't matter. Anyway, I was reading that book, and he said, what if you treated yourself like you treat everybody else in your life?"
It's powerful.
And I was like, don't even know that that's English. Like, what do you mean? I looked around my apartment, and I was like, I never ever would put myself on the list there. And that's when it dawned on me. And he said in that book, he says, you are a precious child of God. You are precious in and of yourself. And I remember always saying, God just wants me to work my ass off and take care of everybody else. And I'm going to live to a ripe old age working my ass off. And nothing for me. Like that was the viewpoint I had in life.
Mm.
So when I saw, oh, I get to be put on the list, I went out and bought myself a couch, and I bought myself a TV, and then I bought myself a Lexus convertible. I overdid it a little.
Hey, well, but you said like two sentences ago, you said, hey, I bought my ex-wife a Toyota Highlander. I think it's so powerful that you made that statement, and I would encourage people, write that down. What if you treated yourself like you treat everybody else? I have a friend out of New York, Frank Lopes, and I remember him sharing in a book that he wrote, talking about he says, there's a reason that they have you, if you're on a plane and the plane's going down, they have you put on your life preserver first. First, you put on your life preserver, because if you don't put yours on, or life vest, whatever, if you don't do it for yourself first, if you don't take care of yourself first, you cannot take care of anybody else. And so I think that's really powerful as you're stating that.
We can say that until we're blue in the face, but most
Hmm.
people won't believe us because they're living out of those drives. I
Hmm.
was just doing a year-end review with a client of mine that I've been working with for 6 years,
Sure.
and he did his review for the past year, and I said, what surprises you as you looked at your calendar and as you looked at your successes and shortcomings for the year? What just surprised you? He said, I took so much more personal time than I thought. We did more personal travel. I golfed. I went to the gym. I took such good care of myself last year. And I was like, oh, interesting. I said, you guys crushed your goals, didn't you? He goes, we totally crushed our goals. And I was more effective when things went to shit. I was more present for my family. I was more present for my wife. I was like, thank you for feeding that back to me, because I can say that as many times as I want, but until someone experiences that, taking care of yourself, golfing with your friends, like, men don't have friends. Going out and
Gosh,
spending time with friends and having that downtime will make you a better husband or wife, will make you a better parent, and will give you traction at work instead of spinning your wheels so fast. So we can say it till we're blue in the face, but until someone feeds that back to me and sees it for themselves, then they go, oh my God, had no idea.
that's super powerful, Mark. Before I get too far, I always will get like 3/4 of the way through the show and then remember this stuff. So I'm gonna give the pitch right now. A couple of things. First off, if you want to connect with or bookmark for coaching or speaking, any of those things, make sure you check out his website. It's markjsilverman.com, markjsilverman.com. I say that for the benefit of anybody that may be listening to the podcast later. Also, I stole this from the email that you sent me. If you want to get a copy of the Rising Leader Handbook, it's genie.us. So GENI.
Oh, no, yeah,
US.
there's a link on my website. You don't
Okay.
have, they'll never
Okay.
figure that
Well,
one
then
out.
go to his website and then you do that and do Rising Leader Handbook, or just go to Mark's website and there's a link there. So definitely check those things out. As we're talking about this, one of the things that I always ask my guests, ask my new friends as they're coming on is, hey, do you have some things that you want to lean into? And also one other thing, because I know, Mark, you have your own podcast. It's the Rising Leader Podcast. How often do you do that show?
Once a week.
Once a week. Okay.
Solo podcast, and then I interview executives who have personal experience with the topics we're talking about.
Absolutely. So make sure that you tune in and check out Mark's podcast as well. One of the things that you talked about, making effective leaders, and sort of the four main areas of making an effective leader. You said leading up, leading across, leading your team, and then leading you. Let's dive into that a little bit if we can on this show. Where is that the order you go in? Where do you start?
Oh, it's the order.
I read it backwards. Okay.
I know all of my people who are my advisor kind of people who read the book, they're like, leading you should be first.
That's what I thought.
No, leading you is not first. For me, it's not first. I use all these relationships, all these situations, all these interactions to grow a person. So it's leading up, becoming a trusted advisor. I start with leading up is because, for me personally, I don't get calls generally from HR or even my clients directly. I get calls from CEOs who say, I have this person on my team. They're so talented, but they don't speak up. I need them to speak up. I need them to take care of this, or they're a bull in the china closet, or they're too technical, or they're too in the weeds with their teams, or they're driving me absolutely crazy. So I start with leading up because that's bang for your buck. If you make your CEO, thrilled with you, that's ground zero. So that's where we start. Then it's leading on a team of powerful peers. How do you lead across? How do you lead with other people who have agendas, who have ambition, who have ideas, who are fighting for resources? How do you lead? How do you have that co-opetition where you're on that team? And
you said co-opetition?
I said co-opetition, yes.
Co-opetition. I like it.
Because it's silly to say, oh, we're one team, we're one family, and we're all rowing in the same direction. That's true. But we also want resources. We also want wins. We also want validation. So it's a co-opetition kind of thing, but it's a win-win-win kind of scenario. And then it's leading the team, which there are a ton of books on how do you lead your team? How do you delegate? How do you motivate? How do you inspire? All those things. And then leading yourself is last, because now that we've gone through, what is your relationship with your boss like? Where's the friction points? What are your triggers? Then where are your triggers with your team? Where are you falling short? Where are you having friction and arguments? Now we get to leading you. We can take all that information and we can see where all this come from. Oh, I get triggered from that because of this from childhood. Oh, I have to work for this. I make this mean that in my head. So we use leading yourself, which is actually the only thing I care about, which is who are you becoming as you're on this leadership journey? How is your experience of life improving? How are you becoming more intimate and more vulnerable and more powerful in your relationships? So for me, that's the piece is, success for success' sake winds up having you crash and burn the way I did and the way I see so many other people do. When you're growing as you're leading, as you're moving up through the ranks, and you're learning who you are through that, that's sustainable success.
Man, you have so many, you have a ton of wisdom when it comes to this stuff. I have to tell you, Mark, I really enjoy hearing you speak and just the way you're talking about it. I want to expand into some of these here. When you're talking about leading up, so you're saying leading up, becoming a trusted advisor, you're talking about leading your management, leading your leaders, or can you expand on that? Can you break
It's
it down a
totally
little bit?
it's totally leading. It's funny because I was having a little trouble in my relationship,
Hmm.
and my coach said to me, and my coach is a young lady who is half my age, and charges a quarter of what I charge, and has a quarter of my experience, but she has my number. And she said to me in my relationship, my personal relationship, she says, Mark, you write these leadership books, and you're a profound leader. She said, but you
Hmm.
manage your relationship. I went, excuse
Mm.
me? Steve Chandler, the godfather of coaching, said, I wrote the best leadership book he's ever. You're telling me I'm a manager? And she showed me where, where there's a place in my life where I'm not a leader. So just because your boss, you work for your boss, that doesn't mean you don't bring your leadership into that conversation. You don't take, leadership is taking responsibility for your side of the street, taking responsibility for understanding and knowing who your boss is. What is their triggers? What are their values? What do they look for? What do they need? Taking responsibility for, communication is with the communicator, right? If you want someone to hear you, you have to craft your message. You have to craft your manner. You have to craft your energy so that it can be received. It's
I
not your
love it.
boss's responsibility. Now, if I'm coaching the boss, it's his responsibility or her responsibility to do the same thing on the other side. But I'm coaching you. I'm not coaching your boss. So you have to learn, just like they're an opposing team, and you're learning their defense and their offense. You're learning the best way to communicate with them. I just just before this podcast, I got off with one of my clients, and his boss, and the reason I was hired was because he's super successful in leading his organization. He turned it around, and they're profitable, and it's gangbusters. But nobody wanted to work with him. Everybody thought he was a bull, and they didn't like him. And he's tall, handsome, charismatic, wonderful guy, and we needed to change the ship. And we worked so hard on what goes on with him when he's asking for someone to, take care of a task. What's going on inside of him when
Hmm.
he's talking to the boss? What's going on? And we learned all these things. He's an Enneagram 3. He's an achiever. So we use personality tests. So an achiever kind of takes relationship, puts it to the side,
Hmm.
and only looks at the goal. So for me, I'm a happy helper. I'm an Enneagram 2. I take relationship too much in for granted. So we all do. We all err on different
Yeah,
sides.
yeah.
Anyway, we just did our conversation with his boss, and I said, I just wanted to find out how things are going because I coach in a bubble. I'm not in your organization. I don't know what's happening. And he
Right.
said, I was going to call both of you. I just had the leadership meeting, and everybody was saying, what a change in this young man. What a change. It's night and day. It's such a pleasure. And the difference is it seems genuine, like they feel him. And that was when I was a proud papa, right? Like that was
Yeah.
like this wasn't him just crossing some T's and dotting some I's and checking some boxes. We changed how he showed up in these interactions with his boss and with his peers, so that there was an absolute shift. Now this man can be promoted. He couldn't be promoted before, even though he was successful, because he
Sure.
had these behavioral issues that he couldn't even see. Now the sky's the limit.
Well, it's crazy when you're telling me and you're going, hey, behavioral issues, but the guy's a strong leader, he's goal motivated, he's charismatic. You're saying all these things to me that I'm going, kick ass and take names, let's go. But I'm a 3 with a 4 wing. I can speak on the integrate, or I,
Yeah,
that's what I've,
great, right?
right. So I can hear that. And it's interesting because I've had a coach in my life say similar stuff. One of the things that I'm hearing you say about this, sort of those two keys to leadership globally, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, is, one, it's important to take responsibility. Two, you have to become a good communicator, not just what you're saying, but be aware of how they're receiving it. What are one or two other key traits when you're moving somebody into leadership globally, not for the individual, that you would say, hey, these things have to be possessed for you to move into that role and be good at it?
I think the most important thing is to set your ego aside. And when I say your ego, I mean the part of you that makes things mean things. So someone will say something to you and you
Mm-hmm.
won't hear it. You put it through your filter. They call the human mind a drunk monkey stung by a scorpion. Right? Trying to tame the human mind is like trying to tame a drunk monkey stung by a scorpion. Not just a monkey, not just a drunk monkey, but one stung by a scorpion. So if the ancients were trying to figure that
It's a
out,
lot of layers.
we can't. So every time someone says something to us or walks into our vicinity, it goes through all these filters and all these things. So if we're offended or we think they mean things, we're gonna act towards what we think things mean versus reality. So Byron Katie, the author of Loving What Is, says when you argue with reality, you only lose 100% of the time. If you can't, so setting your ego aside is trying to get to reality in your relationships, in every interaction, and in every. So you're going to get triggered by things. You got to know what your triggers are. Then you got to know how to talk yourself off the ledge. Sometimes it takes days. Sometimes it takes minutes. Sometimes it can take a second. Right? You can just take a deep breath. So what I heard you say is such and such. I made it mean this. Is that what you meant? And now you can get closer to what's reality. And now you can address the exact issue. So setting your ego aside is, or another piece of that is, why should I have to? I don't understand why I have to sell to my customers. I have to sell to my team. And now I have to sell to management. Why do I have to do that? When you argue with reality, you only lose 100% of the time. It's your responsibility, right? Your enrollment skills. Everything is sales. Everything is enrollment because everybody's vying for attention, for resources. So, it's your job. That's what you signed up for.
Absolutely. Well, and attention, especially everything, like every minute and a half. They've done studies. My background's in the auto industry, and they say, it's like, oh, why can these sales managers not get more done? And this is the same across any industry. It's because they've done studies and they say, as a quote unquote manager, you get interrupted every minute and a half of your day, interrupted from the direct goal or path that you're headed on. So I'm curious, one of the things when you're saying, okay, take responsibility, be a good communicator, can you pinpoint, so what changed? What changed? And I'm talking about this one client, but I think it'd be beneficial for everybody in leadership. You said, hey, you went from somebody that was not well received. What is there something you can pinpoint? You say, hey, this 1, 2, or 3 things were terrible and they changed. Was it just him, taking more responsibility and investing them, becoming a better communicator? What was that one thing?
So if I tell you my secret, people are going to be like, he charges how much for that? So, because I told after we got off the phone with the Zoom with his boss, I said, I told you just little tiny shifts were going to make a big deal.
Little radio dials. Yeah.
So the thing was, there was no pause. He actually is huge-hearted, wonderful guy. Like, oh my God, huge heart. I couldn't figure out why the 360 came back arrogant and all I couldn't figure it out because he's just such a love. And so what we did was we worked on that pause between, oh my God, there's a task. I have to go get this done. I need this report from this beat, to, okay, take a beat. So the way we did that was we practiced. His job was to take a walk every day with no headphones and no phone. It could be 5 minutes, but we did presence exercises so that we could get that pause in there. When he got that pause in there, when he was conscious, he was charming and warm and wonderful. The problem was all day long he wasn't conscious because he was a golden retriever going after a ball all day long. So we got him to be present when he went to meetings and he was present. There was just a vibe change, right? It wasn't
So
even
good.
so much the behavior. He just vibed. And the cool thing in that feedback that came back was they said they felt the difference. And that's when I knew I did the right job in having him pause. I also had him look at who he was automatic. So there's a difference between who we are automatically from
Mhm.
all the conditioning, all the things, all the experiences in our lives, who our default Mark Silverman, our default Mike Phillips is.
Yep.
And then who is the created Mark Silverman? Who's the created Mike Phillips? And that created person is the one who meditates and journals and questions some of his actions to see what happened, who goes into his childhood and looks at some things to see, oh, look, these are causing some things, and does some work on himself so that I can show up in a way I intend. And then I make statements about who I am and how I show up. Right. For me, I am a man grounded in God with the heart of a lion. Right. That's the first line of my personal statement of who I am. That reminds me, how am I going to show up every day rather than the default guy who is a freaking addict and that is not gone. Right. So, so instead of drinking now, I buy quarter zips, that kind of thing.
That's
It's
funny.
it's much healthier.
Yeah.
Um,
And you look
but
good. You know?
Thank you. They just opened a Greg Norman outlet a mile from my house. I'm not a golfer. It's cultural appropriation, but I like to dress like a golfer.
Hey, like I said, don't judge it, right? If it works, just roll with it.
So anyway, so we just had him practice being the person he wanted to be in the world, the relationships he wanted to be. And I kept challenging him further and further and further of, this is okay. So I want to show up and I want people to light up around me. Why? And we drilled down until he was connected in his heart to how he wants to affect the world. And that's
So powerful.
everybody underneath that automatic person has a heart and a soul and wants to connect. Everybody. It's just you have to get underneath that person. And that's why I find my job so easy. Once I get people to get conscious, the rest is easy.
Well, no, I think it's absolutely phenomenal, Mark. The thing is, we get so accustomed to, while they're an email on my screen, it's that black and white text that we lose the humanity. And I think that's when you like disconnected with me, because when you're saying, hey, look, just ditch the stuff and be present. What I heard, or what the way I took it is, and I think this is relevant for every single leader and manager in business anywhere, because if you're in a leadership and management role, it is easy to fall into that trap of, well, we've got this goal, we've got this quota, we've got this thing. And especially if you have a personality, like you were saying, Enneagram 3, right? Then it's even easier. But that's a different conversation. But we get so goal focused that we're constantly living in the future and looking past the people that are right in front of us. And I think it's so powerful that you said, look, take 5 minutes or whatever that time frame is. It forces you to pull back and stop living in the future and be right in front of that staff. That's how I took it. Is it's like, then they feel valued, then they feel important. I think it's really, really, really good.
One of the problems though, like, again, there's a pitfall with being present. There's a
Sure.
reason we're not present, because sometimes being present doesn't mean, and I'm just Zen Master
Sure.
Flash. Me, when I get present, sometimes what I see is I'm scared, right? I have fear. Like, those are uncomfortable feelings. Underneath that, even more present, is not that fear. But the reason that we achieve, the reason that I fawn over people and make people feel loved is because that keeps me safe. So that when I get present, the first thing I feel is fear.
So let me ask you a question. Because that's tough to admit for everybody. Oh, well, hey, I can feel this fear, or I'm scared of this, or however you want to verbalize it. Uh, for you, Mark, when you feel that start to set in, how do you overcome it?
Well, it used to be really hard. Now I breathe. And the mantra that I've learned is, I don't like this. it scares me, and welcome. I don't like this. It scares me, and bring it on. So I just take a few deep breaths, and so I've been on 1,000 stages.
Sure.
I still get terrified before I walk on a stage. Still get terrified. Cher, and I was just watching an interview with Cher, and Cher says she gets terrified before she walks on a stage. She says not when she's on the stage, before she walks on the stage. So that made me
Yeah.
feel so much better. But I've just learned to do things scared. I've just, like, my whole life, that whole sales career, was terrified every day. I learned to get people. I remember when I first got successful, my men's group was like, Mark, teach us how to make money. I said, I don't know how to make money. I just know I'm terrified every freaking day, and I get up and I go do it anyway. That's all
Yeah.
I know. Like this whole coaching thing, like putting a leadership book out, like to press send on a leadership book to Steve Chandler, the godfather of coaching, to ask him to review it. Like, I stood there with my finger over the thing and I sent it to him. Right. And that was terrifying. But like, the consequences of not doing those things is a much smaller life. And I was told once by a psychic, Mark, do you know what your biggest fear is? I said, homelessness, not making money, not looking good. She says, no, being ordinary. I was like,
that stings.
I was like, I couldn't talk. I was like, so true. So true. I need to be special in some fashion. That's my 3-wing, right? Like I need to shine. It was so interesting. So being present and being, kind of getting underneath all of that is the preferable way, instead of playing whack-a-mole with behaviors.
I love that. The other things that we talked about, and I want to move through these. So you're talking about leading across. You talked about leading your team. Can you expand? Actually, before I go to that, because one of the things that you did bring up, and I don't want to lose this thought. This is just how my brain works. So we're headed this direction, then we're over here. So you were talking about leadership books and leading and where you are as a leader and a leadership speaker and consultant. But you said your coach said to you that you manage yourself,
My personal
relationships.
No, my romantic relationship. I manage that.
So what is the difference in that instance when you're defining it, or how do you define it as the difference? Because we've talked a lot about those definitions of leadership. And for the sake of everybody else learning, what's the I don't want to say red flag, but what's the sign? What's the notice that you can say, hey, I'm managing this thing? When she said you were managing it, what does that mean?
So I had to ask the same question, because I was like, I don't know what you mean. I am a leadership coach.
This is what I do.
I don't understand. And it was, I don't show up in my marriage authentically. Again, I'm an Enneagram 2. My only, my as a helper, my worth and my value is reflected back to me from somebody else. So I wrote Only Tens. My first book was learning how to set boundaries, learning how to get things done with ADD, learning how to ask for what I want, learning how to speak up, learning how to say no. Right? I learned how to do all those things. I was doing all those things in my relationship, but I wasn't showing up. If I wanted romance, I was saying we need more romance. Like, I wasn't showing up romantic and open, right? I wasn't showing up the man I wanted to be. I was trying to say, I need these things for me to be okay. I need you to do these things, instead of me being okay on my own. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, it does.
Being me, no matter what the situation was. And when I showed up that way, I became more attractive.
No, and I think the reason I asked that is because I think it's really relevant when it comes, like, there's so much of leadership that bleeds over into our lives as parents, bleeds over into our lives as who we are in our church and in our families and as a spouse. And so I think it's relevant, because it's one thing to talk about, the global definition of leadership and have these traits and characteristics, and you'll kick ass and take names and do this. But then when we got to, turn that back on us, even you said it here. One of the things that I caught is you said, oh, hey, I was doing this, but we need to do it this way. And so it's just interesting. You have that one little tweak. You said it earlier, right? It's these little dials that I want to make sure people are aware of, that it is important as a leader. You show up as that person, and you can't just expect it of somebody else, I guess, if that sort of ties in with what you're saying. Yeah, hey, well, I'm expecting this from you.
And the reason that I share so personally about these things is because I do show up a certain way in the world, and I do, people do see me in a certain way. And all of us leadership coaches or leaders or movie stars, like whoever, we project on people. And if you meet me, Mark is a leader. Mark knows, where Mark stands. He's authentic. He says these things. But to show people that you can be really good at this in one part of your life, and it's still a blind spot in another part of your life. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's always areas of growth. And for me, this past year and a half has been my marriage of me. I want my marriage. My marriage was fine. I wanted to take it to the next level, and I couldn't figure out how to take it to the next level. And I thought it was by managing it, because that's what Instagram says. And this insightful young woman had my number, and she said, no, it's by you showing up as a leader in this manner. And that was the game changer for me.
That's it. That's actually, really profound and really powerful, because when you, and I think it's important that people need to hear, people that listen to this podcast, leaders, managers, like, you need to hear that it's every relationship in our lives. As you're talking about it, hey, this is how it is with my personal relationship. But I think the best leaders, and you said this early on, hey, introverts make the best leaders. Introverts make great leaders. However, we want
salespeople. They make great leaders too, but salespeople.
Yeah, but they make great. Yeah, forgive me. You're correct. So you said they make great salespeople because they manage those relationships. And I think it's important that the only way we become leaders is by having relationships. If it's just us on our own, if it's just me, if it's just Mark, you're not leading anybody. You have to have those relationships in our lives. Just at the tail end, one of the things that you stated in the email when we were talking, you said, creating a life worth living. Can you just expand on that statement a little bit? And then I got one other question I want to ask you before we come to a close here.
So again, the only reason I do this is, like, my clients are going to be successful with or without me. I don't care how much money anybody has anymore. I don't care about the power they have. I don't care about any of that stuff. What I care about is their experience of life. If we're going to work this, if we're going to be here on Earth,
yes,
for whatever amount of time we're going to be on it, like, this planet is freaking gorgeous. This planet is amazing. Like, like there's billions and trillions and stars and we're like right next to this beautiful star, and we can feel the heat from it. If we don't enjoy this go around, if we don't find love and joy and connection in this go around, I find all that empty. And I just don't think I just know too many billionaires. I know billionaires who are miserable, and it's just stupid.
It's crazy.
I have a really low bar for my life. I have very low expectations. If my kids are okay, then that's all I care about. Everything else is gravy. So as long as my kids are safe, healthy, and okay, everything else is gravy. Something happens to one of my kids, I'll find an even lower bar, because there's no reason for me not to experience this life in some fashion of adventure. And for me, adventure is how much impact can I have on people? How much creativity can I bring to the world? I paint and I draw and I do these things, and what kind of relationships can I build? So for me, that's the most important thing. Building a life worth. I tell most of my clients are younger men in their 30s and early 40s, And I
Okay.
tell them all the time, I am the ghost of Christmas future. I said, I am
Mhm.
going to save you half of your wealth. I am going to keep you with that woman who you fell in love with, uh, because you're going to have date night and you're going to show up in a certain way. And you are going to thank me later. Because it's just so easy to fall into that trap, so that when you're 45, 50, 55, you're divorced, half your money's gone. The person who you loved most in the world is now no longer your spouse, because most of us, remember that person we fell in love with, and are sorry that we screwed it up. And I get more thank yous from wives than I can ever say.
That's awesome. So I have kind of in closing here, I'm curious of a couple of things. One, we get into these shows and we talk a lot about experience. We talk a lot about, your background and I mean, you have so much insight and valuable information. Mark, I can't thank you enough for joining me on the show today, man. I'm curious, who do you allow to influence you? Who are two or three people that pour into Mark and you say, hey, I look to them? Because you said, you've been through some growth this year. I know
Mm.
you mentioned the one young lady who or what, because like Google's out there, YouTube's out there, are the people that you say, hey, you know what? I allow this in and I want them to influence me and grow my life. Cause I would love to share that with the people
Oh,
in
so
my audience.
for me personally, I have a group of coaches. There's four of us that get together on Zoom every Friday at 2 o'clock, and we've been doing this now for 8 years.
Love it.
And we share our intimate challenges, our business challenges. We coach each other, and I just have people who are so far into my life and into my psyche that I can't hide anywhere. So that's that. I always have a coach. So that's another thing. Right now, for me, the most influential person in my life right now is Michael Singer, who wrote The Untethered Soul and Living Untethered. Uh,
Okay.
his podcast. Whenever someone calls me up in dire straits, I'm like, listen to at least 3 episodes of his podcast, then call me back, then we can talk. Because so Michael Singer has been astoundingly influential in my life. Steve Chandler, who he wrote um, Reinventing Yourself, and
Mhm.
he's written about 25 books. In fact,
Yeah.
all 10 of his books are on sale right now for $79. 10 of his audiobooks. Steve Chandler, every page of every Steve Chandler book will change your life. Every page. It's ridiculous how good these books are.
That's
And you
awesome.
can buy the very best of Steve Chandler, and it has most of his best stuff in there. Great book.
Go check that out. Well, thank you, Mark. Any, as we come to a close, here's a couple things I want to remind everybody of. First, if you want to connect with Mark, and please do, go check out his website. It's markjsilverman.com. Make sure I would put the other link up here, but you can look on his site for the Rising Leader Handbook. He's got it right there over his shoulder. Also, I'd recommend if you're interested, look Mark up on LinkedIn. He's there at linkedin.com/Mark, MARK 22102. That's the link. But if you look up Mark J. Silverman, comes right up. I mean, just an absolute wealth of information. I can't thank you enough, man. It's been a really enjoyable conversation. Any final thoughts that you would have to take us out for
I want to
today?
thank you for asking some very insightful questions and hanging with me, because uh, leadership can be pretty sterile if you look at LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And we're human beings, all just trying to make it through the day. And I like to talk about leadership from that standpoint of a human being stepping into a role, stepping into a calling. I believe leadership is sacred,
Yes.
but you don't leave your humanity when you step into that role. So that's the way I like to talk. So I appreciate you hanging from my perspective.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed the conversation. If you would hang out for just a minute, I'm going to go ahead and take us out. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to bring us to a close for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit with my new friend, Mark J. Silverman. But man, just a ton of insight. Do me a favor, because I really hope you gained a lot of wisdom from this episode. one, if you would please do me a favor and just, share some thumbs up on it or click some thumbs up on it, share it on your social media. That's one of the ways that this show grows. Tune in on Spotify and Apple. And, I have it here on YouTube regularly. Most importantly, if you know somebody in your life, in your organization, maybe in your family that would gain some wisdom and some insight and some knowledge from this episode of the Leadership Toolkit, the best thing you could do is just share it with them. Please share the show, because that's one of the things that we want to do. We want to impact people to be great leaders, great humans, and grow themselves and the people all around them. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in and joining me today. Until we speak next, which will be, actually next week will be Christmas. So Merry Christmas, everyone. And until we speak next, stay great. We'll talk soon, everybody.